In today's event, today's hour together, we're going to be focusing on the seat. So, the seat is so foundational for all riders. Doesn't matter what discipline you ride, what saddle you ride in, how long you've been riding. The seat is the foundation, and we can all improve on our seat. And Wendy is so skilled at being able to give clarity to all of these kind of phrases and things that we're told in writing instruction, break down some misconceptions about things, and really help even today, looking through a screen with some things that we can understand and that we can feel to really make a difference the next time that you're out riding in your seat and how stable
Hey,
you feel.
I just realized Neville's upstairs. Should I run up real quick while people are coming in and so he can
Yes,
be here with us? Okay, I'll be
yes.
right back.
We definitely have to have Neville. So while you're coming in and while Wendy is bringing her assistant down, I would love to know what is something that you have been told about your seat? What is a piece of instruction that you've been given? What is kind of how you would think about describing what is a good seat? So I know some of the things that I hear a lot are having a deep seat. How we want to have an immovable seat. Yep, sit deeper. I'm not the only one that's heard that one. There he is.
Yep. He's jet lagged too.
Um, oh, yeah, we've got lots coming in. Relax your hips. Stop arching my back. Effective invisible aiding. So these are all the things that people have heard about what to do for seat, how they would describe their seat, how they would describe a good seat. Quit looking down, heels down,
Oh,
shoulder.
Gail, you should have a pair of lookup glasses if you're talking about you're gonna see me in at Western States Horse Expo. We can solve that one.
Amazing. So while everyone is starting to put these in or continues to put these in, of what you've heard. And it's important to think about this because the way that we phrase things has an effect on what we do with our body. That is one of the things that I remember early on hearing and learning from you, Wendy, through the Feldenkrais work is that phrase, we can't think a thought without a movement.
Right.
So while these are coming in, I'm just curious with all of the students that you've worked with and this clinic that you did this weekend, was that with riders or was that Surefoot?
It was Surefoot, but I did a couple of riding lessons, so
Yes. So
so.
what to kind of help people start to get an idea of how you work, is there a story that comes to mind of a difference that you saw in a student seat?
Well, the thing is, I see a difference in every student I work with because so I'm just looking here through the chat and all these instructions that were given, right? And there's effective invisible aids, sit in the middle, leaning forward too much, shoulders, hips, and heels in line, quit looking down, heels down. You know, all of them are really interesting because what I find is that most instructors are telling you something, but not showing you something. They might model it, they might demonstrate it, but they don't make clear to the rider what they actually want. In many cases, they're actually not clear about it either. They're just simply repeating something they heard. So like this weekend, I had a student and she's a lovely rider. She was an event rider. She's got multiple horses. And I watched her in her warm up and she's way forward in her warm up with her hands down and wide. And I'm like watching this and the horse is having to raise his head and neck. And all I can think of is, why are you doing that? Because if we understand what happens with weight and balance, she's wanting the horse to find his balance, but at the same time, she's contributing to his being out of balance. And so, you know, I just see this over and over that riders are trying so hard to do what they've been told to do by their instructors. They're not. I've never met a student that's trying to do it wrong, right? They're trying to do it right, and they're trying to follow the instructions that they're given. And some of the instructions are misconceptions. Some of them are good, and some of them are outright wrong. And there's no way that a student is going to be capable of making that discernment between good, mistruth, and wrong when they're getting a lesson because they're too busy attempting to do what they're being told. And
Mhm.
so then they feel unsuccessful because they work so hard to do what they've been told, but it's not actually addressing the fundamental. And I think that's the key here is what is the fundamental thing that's going on that's, why the instructor is saying this. The other thing, I was at Equine Affair in April, and I walked past another clinician's arena. And in under 15 seconds, that rider was told 5 different things to do. Now, she's still busy trying to figure out what the first one was because it's coming over a PA and there's a lot of audience. And so she's distracted. Never mind the other 4 things. And very often I find that instructors give the student too many instructions in too short a time so that they can't actually figure out what they're doing. And then they're so busy, they're behind and they're trying to catch up, or they're, okay, I was just told, sit up, shoulders back, and then, my feet go forward. And now I have to think about my feet. And it's more think about it in bits and pieces.
Mhm.
The other thing that I'm going to mention is, and okay, so we've had a lot of responses here. We got a ton of people on. All right, I want everybody to type into the chat one thing they do well with their horse. One thing you do well in your riding. Put that in the chat. Okay, and I'm already noticing that nobody's typed anything yet. Wait, there we go. Connect. Okay, so that's a word I don't understand. Uh, all right, so we're starting to get some responses there. But it's like so hard when we listen to riding instructors again, and it's my profession, right? But when I often listen to lessons or ask people questions, they can't answer that question. So this is great to see that so many of you are able to answer that question.
This is in our community, we answer this question a lot. So
Okay, so because
you
this
guys
is
are very
highly unusual, I'm going to tell you, this is highly unusual to get this many great answers. Um, so you've done a good job there helping people recognize what they do well, because in the typical, in my typical clinics, I ask people that question and I get, um, um, what do you do wrong? Oh, I can't sit the trot. I don't get my canter lead. I'm not sitting upright enough, and they have the litany of the things they're doing wrong, as opposed to the things they're doing right. So this is awesome to see that your community is actually able to answer that question and pretty quickly, which is really nice. But it's unusual. It's unusual. Um, and I think that that's just a statement on the industry when people are working with instructors, that that so often what they come away with is what they didn't do well.
Mhm. Yes. So with the seat, I think with improving anything in riding, here we're focusing on our seat. I find that it is so important, as you said, to have a way to be able to feel what the position is, what the movement is, so that there's that memory to come back to in the feeling. And one of the things, and this is why you ran to get Neville, that I think
Yeah.
helped with being able to put this together is the visual understanding of what's going on inside of our body. And that's why this really sets your teaching and the courses apart, is how you teach with the skeleton. So in finding the seat, we've got 3 things that we're going to go through today for finding your seat so that you can take these and you can remember them, the next time that you're with the horse. So do you want to start, Wendy, with hip joints?
Well, let's get simpler. Okay, I'm
Okay.
just going to switch my camera here, and let's just here's Neville. Okay, okay, how's that make everybody feel? Right? And he falls out of sight. So, what we have to remember is that we have a skeleton. Horse has a skeleton. We have a skeleton. Okay. And we cannot avoid Newtonian physics. What do I mean by Newtonian physics? That the laws of physics developed by Newton. Okay. Gravity. Gravity is the force that is pulling us down toward the center of the earth. Ground reaction force is the force of the earth pushing us back up. So if I can have everybody on the audience stand up, Okay, in order to do that, you had to push against the earth and the earth had to push against you. And that's the only way you can stand. So you have to push against the earth and the earth pushes back against you and that lets you stand because you have a skeleton. So all mammals, right, have a skeleton. And the difference is that the horses are horizontal. So now they have gravity acting on a lot more of their surface area than we do when we're vertical. So we're taking a horizontal structure, right? And we're taking a vertical structure and we're putting them together. Now, because of this structure, there are certain parts of this structure that are designed for mobility and certain parts that are designed for stability. And I think a lot of people get under the false impression that the spine is supposed to be super mobile. And in fact, the spine needs to be quite stable because it has to protect the spinal cord, which is running through the spine. So while we have humans have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 6 lumbar, yeah, and a sacrum. And really, what that's is that right? Do we have 5? I forgot now.
I think it's 6.
Okay, all right. I just had a moment of like jet lag. Felita will correct me if I'm wrong there. So when you think about it, what the vertebrae are doing is they're actually limiting movement so that we don't pinch that nerve. And if anybody's ever slipped a disc and had a pinched nerve, they know how painful that is. Okay. 5 lumbar. Thank you. um, so, the spine needs to be quite stable. If we, instead of keeping the spine stable, start asking the spine to do a lot of movement when we're riding, now we have the potential for injury to the back, to the spine, particularly in the lumbar spine. So if we're saying, oh, look, we need a lot of movement to follow the horse, I'm going to get his arms out of the way while I do that, maybe. Hang on. Neville and I are having a discussion. There we go. Okay. So if we're moving a lot here, okay, we're having to stiffen other places. But the back is not designed to have that much movement. We're designed to have it has a little more curve when we're standing and a little less curve when we're sitting, but it's designed to stabilize because this head has to balance over this pelvis, this pelvic bowl. Okay. And then our legs are designed to move us. So first thing is that we need to think about where we want movement and where we want stability. And when I see riders trying to, I know I'm off track. I know I totally left your topic, but
It's a good foundation.
they're told up to sit up, right? And so then they throw the chest back. Well, that's putting a ton of pressure into the lumbar area. Okay. It's also tipped the pelvis. And then everybody's told to tighten their core because they've tipped everything forward. And now they have to strengthen here and try and pull it back together, but they're still in this position. And so that's just a lot of stress and strain. Whereas if we start to figure out, all right, if I need my back to be more stable, then what gets to move? And what gets to move are the joints of the hip, knee, and ankle. These are the joints that are designed to move us, right? They're designed for us to use in walking, in sitting, in doing yoga, okay, in skiing. And so they're the big shock absorbers is the way I think about them. And they need to be mobile enough to absorb the movement of the horse. When they get rigid, now the forces are going to have to go somewhere else because one of Newton's laws says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So the harder I push on the stirrup, the harder it pushes back on me. And if I've made my leg really rigid, that force is going to go right into my lower back. And I'm either going to have to round my pelvis a whole bunch to try and avoid that pressure or hollow a whole lot. Because if I'm in the middle, I can't handle it because the pressure from the stirrup is impacting right into that hip joint. Does that make sense? Is anybody lost on that? So we can't avoid gravity. We have a skeleton to support us in gravity. We have a spinal column with a whole bunch of vertebrae, but really what they're designed to do is to protect the spinal cord. So they need to limit movement in certain ways. And to limit movement, we need to stabilize things, not in the spine, in the torso, not increase that moment. So if we're sitting watching a rider and they're doing, let's see if I can do this, if I can get myself out of the way a bit. This, side to side movement, look at what's happening in the rider's spine. That's a huge amount of movement. And you see a lot of riders that are taught to do a side to side motion with their pelvis to follow the horse. Well, first of all, there's, I mean, I can go on and talk about that for 2 years, but just from the fact that the spine is having to accommodate so much of that side to side movement, it means we have to stiffen in other places. And so we're not distributing the motion very effectively. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I want to pull up, can I pull up that picture
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the skeleton here? Because I think you can really also visualize the effect that it has on the horse when we start to do that kind of movement. So let me just get
Yeah.
into the right slide here and I'm gonna
Okay.
break this up. Okay, let me make it bigger for everyone.
Yep. So this is Elmer. This is my 5'4" skeleton, which is the same height as me. So you have to realize this is pretty accurate. The only thing is his pelvis is quite stuck in a bit of a anterior tilt because he's got a rod up his butt. I don't, my pointer won't work on this, will it? Can you just make it a little bigger so we lose the head a little bit and the horse's tail a little bit, so we're kind of seeing just a little bit. Yeah, yeah. There we go. Great. Okay. So here's our two C-bones. This is another point that I want to make here is this is a Halloween skeleton, okay? And a plastic 5'4" human skeleton, which is pretty accurate. But what I want you to notice is, and I don't know, nobody can see my pointer, can they?
They can.
Probably not. Okay. Take your pointer and just point out the distance between the two seat bones and the horse's spine there. Yeah. Okay. It's really narrow. Okay. It's really narrow. So this rider here is already leaned to the left, right? You can see that. Look at the spine. It's got a terrible, scoliosis with a bit of kyphosis and a bit of, yeah. Anyway, but what you can see is that's going to impact that horse's spine. It's going to put pressure on that horse's spine. So it's not that riders have to be perfect. No rider is perfectly conformed, but we really have to think about how our weight's being distributed so that we're not impinging on the horse's spine, bareback or with a saddle, either one, right? Because that's going to affect his back and his ability to move underneath us.
And
Okay.
can you comment on a really important point here? Because when we talk about position and the idea of allowing the lower back to lengthen, which I know we're going to talk about more, people often say, well, I have some degree of scoliosis or I have more curvature in my back. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How it's
Yeah.
managing
Yeah.
our weight, not
Yeah.
finding perfect posture.
So, I think we can do this with everybody doing a little movement exercise. Okay. So just before we leave, oh, we left that screen. No problem.
Oh.
So everybody's seeing, you've got a spine, right? And you've got vertebrae, and we're looking at this lumbar area, which I really think we need to look at before we get to hip joints anyway. And we've looked at the pelvis, and that skeleton was a bit anterior tilt, meaning top of the pelvis forward, and then a bit he was off to the left. Okay, so that's putting more pressure on my finger on the right side. All right. So your spine has natural curves, right? There's a curve in your neck, a curve in your upper back, and a curve in your lumbar area. Anytime the curve is going toward the back of your body, it's a kyphosis, KY-phosis. Anytime it's going forward toward the front of the body, like in the lumbar area, that's a lordosis. And anytime it's going sideways, that's a scoliosis. So you can see that Neville has a bit of scoliosis. He has some lordosis and a little bit of kyphosis. Kyphosis and lordosis, curving back and curving forward, are normal, right? Our spines do that because they're stronger with these curves. And the thing is that sitting and standing are two different functions. So when we stand up, we need a slight increase of the lordosis of the lower back to give us a little more stability and strength. But when we sit, we don't have to maintain as much lordosis, forward curve. Now, everybody take your hand, put it on your lower back, right here, put it right there. Okay. And while you're sitting, just feel the shape of your back. Okay. So I'm just going to feel the shape of my back. Okay. And now if I get slumpy and I let my weight kind of go back toward the back of my buttocks, my back has changed shape. It's flatter. If I get really slumpy, and not everybody's able to do as much curve in the low back as others, but some people can really round their lower back. Okay. So as I do this, you'll notice I get taller and shorter, right? So I'm going to take the top of the pelvis. I'm going to go forward. I can feel that I've increased the curvature of my lumbar spine. Okay. And then as I let my lower back come back and I've changed my pelvis, I feel my back shape change. Yep. And you can see Callie going up and down. And probably you all are doing the same thing. So just that, you can feel that the spine can change shape. Now, you're going to take your other hand and you're going to put it under one seat bone. Right there. Be careful because you might be surprised at how sharp that feels. Like when you put your hand on a seat bone, you might be going, wow, I didn't realize how much pressure I could feel on my hand from that sit bone. Now, this is what your horse is feeling, so it's important for you guys to realize that, okay? And you're feeling for this pelvis, okay? These seat bones. All right, everybody with me? Anybody confused? You can just pop it in the chat or just raise hand. I don't know if you guys can do raise hand. Okay, everybody's with me. Great. So I'm going to take one hand, I'm going to put them on my lower back. I'm going to take the other hand, palm up. I'm going to put it underneath one seat bone. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to round my lower back, and lo and behold, my seat bone disappears off my hand. I don't feel it anymore. It's now pointing forward. And then I'm going to bring myself upright and I'm going to feel, wow, there's a wide part on of my seat bone on my hand. And then I'm going to tilt the top of the pelvis forward, increasing the curve of my lower back. So now my hand should feel like it's in a bit of a hollow, the one on my low back. And my seat bone's now pointing toward the rear. Okay. So you can just do that a few times. Just go gently. You can slump and round the lower back and the seat bone points forward. It's not just the lower back you're rounding. We're also changing the position of the pelvis. Okay. Come upright. You can feel the wide part of your sit bone and then hollow your lower back. You're going to feel like, oh, I got really tall in front, but my sit bone disappeared out the back door. Okay. Everybody with me? Nobody's with me. If you're not with me, just pop it in the chat. So we did one side. Great. Okay, now we're going to switch. You're going to take your left hand, put it underneath your left seat bone. You're going to take your right hand, back of the hand on your lower back, because that's more comfortable on your shoulder. Okay, you're going to feel for that seat bone, and you're going to round the lower back. And you might even notice that the sit bone feels different in shape. Mine do. My left one feels broader than my right one. And then I'm going to round my lower back. You can see that I kind of get slumpy. Think texting. Right? I mean, look down and we're texting, right? That's what we're going on. And then you're going to come upright. You're going to feel that seat bone roll on your hand. And then if you hollow your back or arch your back or increase the lordosis, that's all the same thing. You're going to feel that seat bone point out behind. Okay. You are nuts, broader left? No, my seat bones are different on the two sides for sure. Right? Yeah, of course. I also had a horse break my pelvis. So but yeah, we're not all symmetrical. Nobody is symmetrical. Nobody actually looks like the pictures in the books. Okay. We all have what's called individual variation. So you have to realize that just because it says that's the way it's supposed to be in the book doesn't mean that's the way you are. All right. We've found seat bones. We saw, and Neville can't do this with his lower back the way you can, but when you took the top of the pelvis back and you slumped the seat bones, get his legs out of the way, arm out of the way. The seat bones pointed forward. Oh, that's kind of weird. But then I'll bring his legs back down. He's very mobile. But then when you stuck your butt out behind you, the seat bones kind of disappeared off. Sorry, you felt this front edge of the sit bone. When you slumped, it just all kind of disappeared because you were way back here, back by that what's called the acetabulum or the back of the hip socket. Okay. In riding, it makes sense that you want the widest part of your sit bone aiming down in the saddle, because that's the broad weight bearing surface area. Like, you wouldn't want to actually try to like balance, a cup on a little tiny point. You'd want to give it a broad surface. So if you want to support this whole upper body, you want to give it the broadest surface possible so that there's a more surface area over which your weight is distributed.
Mhm.
Okay. So that said, in theory, we want the widest part of the sit bones in the saddle. And when that happens, the lower back is going to lengthen a little. In other words, you already felt that there's a relationship between the direction the seat bones are pointing and whether your back is hollow or round or flat.
Mm.
Okay, so that's where we get to flat back, the idea that we're not taking all the curve out, we're just slightly changing it so that the seat bones are pointing straight down and sitting. Okay, everybody got that? No, Sally, you are not nuts. Okay, so the next piece of this lower back part, because this is really critical to having the hip joints function well. Okay, the next piece is muscles can only contract, but they can contract in a way that shortens the overall length of the muscle, or they can contract in a way that the overall muscle gets longer. So the terms for this are concentric contraction, shortening, or eccentric contraction, lengthening. Now, there's a really simple way to feel this. I have my glass of water. Okay, I'm holding my water. I'm going to feel my bicep. My bicep is in contraction because I lifted my heavy 35-pound bucket of water for my horse to hook it on the hook, right? And I can feel that my muscle is contracted. But as I lower that glass of water or that water bucket, I still feel contraction in my bicep. The overall muscle is getting longer. It's simply contracting in a different place in the muscle fiber. It still only can contract and decontract, but it's where it does it that makes the difference between concentric and eccentric. Eccentric, the muscle overall is getting longer. Concentric, the muscle is getting shorter. So now you're going to take the back of your hand, you're going to put it on your lower back again. If you need to stick a hand underneath your seat bones to figure out where your pelvis is in the middle, go ahead and do that. Okay. And now feel your back and then start to think of sit up straight, shoulders back, chest out, and feel how the back muscles get wirier. They get narrower and tighter. They have concentrically contracted. They have shortened. Okay. Now let that go. Find your seat bone pointing straight down because it also affected your pelvis when you did that. Okay. And now think if you could breathe into your hand, breathe into the muscles on your hand, you can feel the muscles get broader and longer and wider, but they're still in contraction. They're still firm. It's just that they're not shortening, they're getting longer. Okay. And that's what stabilizes the lower back so that it's not getting, too much movement when I'm trying to follow my horse or trying to sit up straight, all those things. It stabilizes that lower back exactly the way we want to stabilize the horse's lower back. So when you think about it, we want the horse's lower back to be stable as well. So this is very similar. So we're not taking all the curve out of the lumbar area, but what we are doing is slightly lengthening it by having the seat bone straight down and then having the muscles change in function from shortening to lengthening. And what that does is stabilize the lower back. And this is really important. We want a horse with a stable lower back. We need a stable lower back. Now, the thing about this type of muscle contraction, this eccentric contraction that is so important is what it does is protect joints. That's its job, protect joints. So if I go back to the example of lifting the heavy water bucket, right? My bicep is contracted. If my bicep simply stopped contracting, wham, I just broke my elbow because that 35-pound weight just went right to the ground and took my arm with it and snapped my elbow and broke my elbow. Ow, right? But because we have eccentric contraction, in fact, if you've ever gone to the gym, they make you work on eccentric contraction. What that does is protect your joints so that they can move more like a hydraulic. Now, if anybody has ever been through a revolving door, okay, like at the airport or at a department store, and if you ever remember trying to make it go faster and you push as hard as you can, but it only goes at a certain speed, that's because it's acting as a hydraulic. It just says you can push as hard as you like, but this is the speed I'm going. With our joints, that's what's happening. When we have that eccentric, we can say, okay, I'm lowering and I'm doing that in a very controlled way to protect my joints. And that's why that is so important. Okay, so
Yeah.
somebody now understands how muscles work. There's also isometric, right? You might have heard of isometric. That's where they're neither, they're kind of like it's a static, like contraction of the muscles. But eccentric contraction is in riding. In fact, in sports, in movement, it's so important because it's protecting our joints. And we really want to protect our lumbar spine. When I've tipped my pelvis forward, increased the curvature of my lower back, and then thrown my chest back, I've put my lower back in a bit of a danger zone because it's contracted and then bulging on this side. And then people tell us to tighten our core. And here's my thought about that. The rectus abdominis, one of the major core muscles that we think about, the six pack, attaches to the sternum and to the front of the pelvis. Okay. So I've gone into this hollow position and now I'm trying to contract, shorten that distance. But what if we just let the pelvis tip back and let our lower back lengthen and then did a little eccentric contraction of our back? It'd be a lot easier. The other thing is, what's between your rectus abdominis and your spine? What's in there? Anybody know? Anybody know? It's called your guts. A fluid-filled sack of slush and fluid and gut stuff, right? All that stuff that you ate. So if you've ever had a water balloon and you squished a water balloon, okay, it's got smaller where you squished it, but everything bulged over here. And you can just play with the water balloon and squish the water back and forth, and air balloon as well. You can squish it back and forth. Yes, there's a recording, I'm sure. Okay.
Yes. In
So here
review.
you're like trying to contract rectus, but you've got a fluid-filled sac in here, right? And it's far away from your spine. So I just think it's a whole lot easier if we just let the seat bones point straight down and the lower back lengthen a little. Now, somebody's asking, how do I keep from hunching when I get my seat bones sorted out or flattened? You probably are trying too hard. I think most people try too hard. And the other thing is that hunching happens up here in your rib cage, and this is down in your lower back. Are we going to have a
We have
picture?
we do. We have a really good picture, I think, that will help to illustrate this. It was these two, this one and then the one after it. Because this is something that you do very commonly in um, at the clinics, helping riders to feel this idea of being able to change the lower back without tightening the abs. Because I find so many people, as soon as they think about changing the position of the pelvis, they tighten the abs in order
Yeah,
to.
they think they have to pull in to do it. And it's, we've culturally taught people that, but it's not necessary. And this person here, you can see that she's a little hollow in the back. She's tipped the top of the pelvis forward and her shoulders are really up and stiff and kind of pushing her chest out. And so I've just got my hands there. And what I'm asking her to do is just like slump, like literally, and you all can do this. You can just take your hands, put it on the front of your pelvis on these bumps right here. Okay. It's the as is, it's a big name. I don't really want to give it to you. You just put your hands there and then just think, well, what if I relax that back a little bit? And you can feel how that, and granted, if you're sitting on a surface that's not flat, you're going to struggle with this a little. Like I always sit to the front edge of my chair because so many chairs slope you backwards. Saddles can also do that. and create a problem. So hopefully you're sitting on some kind of a flat surface, not a squishy thing. And you just think, well, if I just let the top of my pelvis come back just a little bit, notice that that lengthens your lower back, but it didn't influence your chest. In other words, we don't have to do like a lot of people try too hard and they're like, oh, I got to get my seat bones down. And so they really, push them down. But really, it's just letting that top of the pelvis come back a little bit. And I do find that that's what happens is people try make things too big and try too hard. Hard to type with our hands are busy. Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to type because you can watch the recording. Once the top of the pelvis comes back, then I'm going to go and address the upper body. And maybe if you unshare that screen now.
Yes.
So here we are back to Neville. And what I'm going to do the sit up straight, shoulders back, chest out. Okay. Now what I want you to notice is that the top of the chest is now angling toward the back that way, right? And the pelvis is tipped forward down. And then what we have to do with our head, and I'm going to be careful, is we have to stick our heads forward, because if we keep our head back here, we're going to feel like, oh, I'm falling off the back of the horse. So then I've got to try and keep my head forward. Now, if I've been sitting like this for a long time and then I go to find my seat bones, I might notice that, whoa, I'm like feeling like really slumpy. Okay. So we want to be able to start differentiating the bottom from the top a little bit. But here's the thing is the rib cage, when I do the sit up straight, shoulders back, I hinged the whole thing from where the rib cage meets the lumbar spine. Like there's only one joint, right? Just like that. So now I've negated the fact that I have a whole rib cage with a whole lot more joints. So again, be gentle with yourself. Go gently and easily. But you just think, what if I just allowed the top of my pelvis to come back a little bit, right? And not had to worry about sitting up and all that sort of stuff. And then what if I just let my rib cage come over my pelvis? Because if I'm here and I try to relax, it's going to be a bit tricky, right? And then what if I just think about, well, how about if I let my sternum go forward rather than back, right? And look, the rib cage can expand a little bit. So this leads us into root beer float. Okay.
Yes, which I'm so glad you said, because I think that's the key too, just for everyone that's building a conceptual understanding and feeling things, is make sure that you take this out to your horse as well.
Yeah.
And that's what this is going to give.
So root beer float's really simple. Root is just finding your seat bones pointing straight down. Beer is letting your belly go and your rib cage come over your pelvis. And then float is thinking about the top of the sternum going forward up so that the chest expands. Okay, root beer float. I did a demo at Equine Fair in Ohio and I did root beer float and everybody came up to me and like, wow, that was so, because it's simple and it's something you can remember. And if you like root beer, it's even better, right? You can go to A&W and have a root beer float and see how the ice cream floats on the top. So I find a lot of times with people that like are like struggling with the upper body is they've either pushed too far back, like really forced it, instead of just making this simple. Like, how can you reduce that effort and just do a little tiny bit? Yes, I know them. And I think I'm a little different. I have some things that are a little different. We all kind of have a slightly different way of looking at some things from other clinicians that are also looking at body function. Because I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner, I use that, I employ that a lot, and I don't believe the other two are Feldenkrais practitioners. In fact, I know they're not. Okay, so root beer float. Okay, root, that's your seat bones down. With beer is your belly soft with your rib cage over your pelvis, and then float is your sternum forward up. Now, what I want everybody to do, I know I'm like totally off topic, Callie. Okay.
Hey, does
Okay.
anyone feel like this is improving your seat? Then I would say we're right on topic.
Well, I'm gonna give them a simple thing that so many instructors say. So I want you to just, come up on your chair, find your sit bones, Close your eyes, take your rider position. And what's one of the things that most instructors tell you to do with your shoulders? What's a very common thing that they tell you to do with your shoulders? So I want you to imagine holding your reins and do that thing that they tell you to do with your shoulders. Okay. And when you've done that, I've got some people telling me, yep, they tell you shoulders back. Great. So now everybody take your shoulders back. Okay. And I want you to notice where your elbows went. Where did your elbows go when you took your shoulders back? Did they go toward the back of your body? Somebody said out, somebody said back. Okay, we'll let a few more people kind of make a comment, and then I will show it on the skeleton. Backwards. Great. Folded in. That's kind of interesting. The shoulder blades, the elbows folded in. Okay, as opposed to out. Okay, almost down. All right. So here's the typical thing. I will get Neville's arms in a somewhat rider position. You have to realize he doesn't have any muscles. Okay, when he takes his shoulder blades back, okay, which way does his elbow go? Well, his elbow doesn't quite work. Never mind. I won't do it there. Okay, if I take my shoulders back, where do my elbows go? I don't think my elbows went up. If I just think of take my shoulder blades and pinch them together, okay, they went back. Very good. Now you're yelled at not to pull on the horse. So which is it? Shoulders back or don't pull? Because as soon as you take your shoulders back, you've pulled on your horse. And then you're yelled at to not pull. So that gets confusing, doesn't it? Right? And think about it. You know, you do this one action, you pull your shoulders back, but it's moved your arms back. And now you're trying to give. So imagine holding your reins, okay, and sitting up. And I can only zoom in more, so we don't need that. Okay. But you're going to imagine holding your reins and you take your shoulders back and your elbows move back. And now you try and give, right? And you're out of sync. You're not following your horse anymore. So, and how many of you have ever had the crop between your elbows behind your back? That's an old school one that's not uncommon, still being done today. So the minute you retract the shoulders back and down, back anywhere that direction, your arms are going to follow because that's what they do. That's how they work, right? The only bony attachment of your shoulder girdle is your collarbone to your sternum. So all this stuff is wiggly. He has a pin in his shoulder. You don't. Okay. But the minute you take the shoulder back, see, he can't slide his shoulders back the way we can because he has that pin that stops him. But the minute you take that shoulder back and you're thinking about your back body, your arm has retracted and you're pulling on your horse. Okay. I was told to put the shoulders back if I want to stop the horse without pulling with arm. You're still pulling. You're still pulling. You know, what's the difference between more force and less force? A retracting arm is a pulling rein, period. Okay. So that's the thing is we're like told not to pull, but the very action of taking our shoulders back, which we are told to do, is pulling on our horse. And softer, harder, it's still pulling. Anytime you move your arms back, holding onto the reins, you are pulling back on the horse. You are shortening his neck. There's no way you can do it otherwise. So it can be soft. I've seen the most elegant riders on the planet. Grand Prix riders pull beautifully.
That is the key that I think is not often understood, obviously, because it also happens even at the highest levels, is when we pull, it's going to shorten the neck, shorten the top line. And when we've got a bit in and we're pulling, the horse has to, in order to protect his mouth, he's got to tighten his jaw. It's just, he's going to
Well, he might gap his jaw. And this is the problem with the no noseband thing now is the horses just drop their jaw out and then you have nothing and you have to pull harder before you find them. So let's not go down that road because that's another kettle of fish that will sink into for a long time. But what we have to realize is that some of the instructions that we're given are counter to what we're told we want and counter to what we're supposed to do, right? So anytime my arm is coming backward and I have I have a bitless bridle, it's the same thing. I'm still pulling because the arm is moving in a backward direction. Okay. As opposed to being able to give, which is a forward direction. So if I pull my shoulders back and then I have to give, first of all, it's just do that. Just close your eyes, sit, bring your shoulders back, and then feel how much tension there is in trying to advance your arm, because there's so much force going in the opposite direction. That very fact of pulling my shoulder blades back and down moves my arm back as I'm trying to move it forward. So it's the sternum instead of the shoulders. You got it. It's root beer float.
Mhm.
Okay, because when the sternum moves forward up, that automatically changes the shape of the rib cage so that the collarbones widen and the shoulder blade settles down without tension in the arm. There's a question in there on the Q&A.
So okay, this one is about root beer float. Let's do this one first from Jenny. I get the root and the float aspects. Could you clarify what beer means for our
Let your
belly?
belly go. Stop holding your core. Let your rib cage come over your pelvis. Like core. All right, let's talk about core for a moment. First of all, when I was riding as a kid, it didn't exist. The word didn't exist. The concept didn't exist. And little kids rode beautifully because they had to balance their big head. So if you ever see a little kid ride, their head, percentage wise, for their body mass and weight, is so big that they have to find this lovely alignment, because otherwise they're going to fall over. Right? So their little tiny postural muscles, which we all have, are engaged to keep the system upright and take care of the head and ride the horse. And you can see videos of little kids riding Grand Prix tests, right? That don't have six-pack abs. So then we become adults and we, start thinking, oh, we want to, or our mom tells us keep our tummy in and blah, blah, blah. So it's not that the abs don't work. It's that they have to work at the appropriate time in the appropriate amount. And when we tighten our core, we're actually disrupting that organizational function. So think of it as, the body is beautifully coordinated. If I asked you to stand up, your body would coordinate and you would stand up and you would have no idea how you did it because you just stood up, right? You just did it because your nervous system knows how to stand. But if we put ourselves into a position where we've tilted the top of the pelvis forward, and when we've set up, now we're falling forward. So now we have to do something to try and stop it. So we tighten our core. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily improve our function. When we're riding, if we're in a good alignment, like a little kid, our postural muscles are going to do so much to keep us upright and balanced. And then if we need to think about a little more tone, it's not just the abs, it's that we tone our torso to be a little more stable against the movement of the horse. So horse movement, there's a lot of force going on, and your horse goes from walk to canter. That's a big movement. And if I'm not organized, then I'm going to fall back and pull on the mouth. But if I have my body organized to be able to stabilize against the force of the horse accelerating into a canter, then I go with. But I don't think about, oh, I've got to make sure that my spine isn't, blah, blah, blah. I got to, because if I'm doing all those things, I'm not riding my horse. I'm busy doing all these things that I'm trying to do with my body, and I'm not connected to what the horse is doing. When we learn a movement, I don't know if you guys can think back to learning how to post the trot. And at first it felt, I watched somebody learning to rise the trot. At first it looks awful. It's messy. They're out of time. They're out of sync. And pretty soon now you don't even remember how you learned to do it. Right? Because you've got the coordination and the muscles are doing what they need to do at the right moment in time for you to have that movement, that function. It's when we start to get into our head and try to think that I'm going to control my muscles to do this function. That's where I kind of think it's a little silly, because that's why you went through childhood development. You went through walking and crawling and learning how to ride a bike, and and hopefully riding horses as a young person, not always, but not everyone. But that's the process of learning, is how to do that movement. And movement doesn't have language. So when we try to put uh, uh, analytical muscle control on a movement, think about riding your bike and then think, oh, I've got to make sure I tighten my shoulder before I turn the steering wheel. It's like you're going to crash. I guarantee it, because it has to happen in that coordination of pattern movement, which is why, when you watch somebody learning to skateboard, they fall down a lot, right? That's why they wear all the knee pads and everything else, because they're going to fall down, but they get back up. And you don't think, oh, I've got to control you know, my rhomboids and my, you know, quadratus and everything so that I can stabilize. It's like you just get up and you do it again.
Mhm.
So when we're learning movement, we're not thinking about muscles, we're thinking about movement. Hitting a tennis ball, you just do it and you do it, and then you rest and you come back and you do it, and you get a little better because your nervous system starts to figure out what the pattern is that you need to be successful to hit the ball. In riding, when we get into the analyzing of what muscles we're using, we're not with our horse. We're busy in our heads trying to figure out, I got to tighten this or do that or do the other thing. So I'd much rather students, and this is, you know, where I'm a little different is I'm always telling my students to experiment and go back and forth between the old idea and a new idea, or experiment with an idea on a quiet horse, obviously not a young horse that has no clue what you're doing. Because we learn through the experience. We learn through making small mistakes and going, oh, okay, that's what happened when I did XYZ. Now, if I do ABC, how does that work out? But when we're trying to achieve a posture that someone's told us is correct, um, and we're so busy worrying about the posture that we're actually not even with the horse. And so often I'll get riders who, you know, they say, oh, I've only ever trail ridden. I'm like, yay, because they'll be so much easier to shape in movement than the dressage rider that's had gazillion. And I've had students like this that have got gazillions of lessons and they so want to change. And it's so difficult because the pattern kicks in so rapidly because that's what they've trained, that they can't find the new idea. Like it's much harder. So I know that I've kind of gone off on a tangent and Callie's let me run down that rabbit hole.
That's
Um,
where coming in as a beginner has its advantages as well. So for those of you listening and saying, "Oh, I didn't start riding as a kid," you've still got some advantages coming in. And if you are really new and getting this information early on in your journey, and not having lots and lots of repetition of other patterns to then need to change. So we've got a lot of different questions in. What
okay.
I'd like to do, if you could show one more time, Wendy, the root beer float with Neville, just to kind of clear up a little bit of that. And then, has this been helpful for everyone? Do you think you can take some of this out to your next ride and make even a little change? We'll talk a bit about the course with Wendy. I know we have many of our alumni that are already here in the group, and we'll talk a little bit about the Effortless Rider course for those of you that want to explore this more. Because yes, there's the once you start to open your mind and realize that what you've perhaps been doing, that there's a different way to do it. I understand the questions just keep coming. So,
Yep.
Wendy, if you could go one more time through the root beer float, that's the
Yeah, and
core.
somebody asked for a picture, so I'm just looking to see if I've got a picture that I can pull up
Perfect.
quickly. That's oh well
Yeah, this idea of the understanding anatomy and movement and relating that out is you start to, and this is what I've seen so much when you teach, Wendy, is you always start with the foundation of the pelvis, understanding the center. I mean, the root beer float, getting the core of the body aligned. And then a lot of times the issues that riders said that they had coming into that session that they wanted to work on, unsteady contact or not being able to give leg cues, a lot of those can start to resolve themselves, and then you can start to work into the each area of the body, understanding what the actual best function is.
so this is an old picture, but I think you're gonna I just oh you gotta let me share. Um I think you're gonna like this picture just because it's oh allow come on Zoom, what's the problem?
I think we've got it. Is this the picture with Mia now?
Yeah. Okay, great. I don't have it, but you have it. Great. Cool. All right. So, is it perfect? No, but it was, I figured it's like you're working towards something. You're not always absolutely perfect. One of the things you have to realize is Callie is in a jumping saddle. Okay, because Al only has a jumping saddle. So her leg is going to be more forward than if she was in a dressage saddle. Okay. But here her back is flat. You can see that she's not tightening in her belly and that her sternum is forward up. Now, if I was to be a little picky, okay, I'd say, wow, I'd like her head to be a little bit more back. But we know that Callie had an upper back injury. And at the time, Callie, you were dealing with that. You remember?
Yes.
So we see there's a little tiny bit of roundness here, and I know that's coming from her back injury, right? But basically, and it's because it's a jumping saddle, she's like, here you can see a perfectly vertical line in the background. She's slightly forward because she's in a jumping saddle, but we still have a nice line from ear, shoulder, hip. It's just at a slight angle. And when you're jumping, that's what happens is you have a slight angle forward. Okay. But she hasn't tensed and pulled her shoulders back. And we know that because she's allowed the elbows to be soft and she has a lovely straight line elbow to bit. Okay. She's not bracing down in her stirrups and she can't in those particular stirrups. Okay. And she's looking where she wants to go. So, what I want you to realize is, let's see if I can you stop my share? Because I can't figure out how to do that on this. Oh, wait, there it is. There, stop share. Just pulling up a picture. Okay. How do I get this to reduce? My screen's stuck. It's okay. But like what you have to realize is it's not about being perfect. It's about starting to think about these ideas. And what I always say is let your horse vote. So we get so busy trying to be in a perfect eq position or a perfect rider position that we're not actually asking the horse, hey, did that feel better or worse to you? And if we can just give ourselves the opportunity to explore, right? Now, again, not on a young, fractious horse, not in an environment that's super busy, but in a quiet space where you can go, well, what if I soften my chest a little bit? What happens? Or what if I think about expanding my chest? What happens if I pull my shoulders back? What if I let them down? What happens if I tip my pelvis forward? What happens if I round my lower back? And your horse, now obviously you do this giving the horse a chance to respond to each time you make a change, right? You're not going to do all of them at once. Okay. But giving your horse a chance to give you the feedback, because ultimately that is the goal, is that we have a communication between what my body is doing and how my horse is responding. And if we're not providing an opportunity to have the dialogue, the quiet conversation, that if I think, oh, if I just think soften my elbow, does he soften to the bit? If I just think let my sternum drop a little because I've been sitting so tight, does he relax in his back? And if there was nothing else, I feel like that's just a really important thing, is to just take the moment to have the quiet dialogue as you make small changes.
Hmm. So maybe if you want to just go through one more time with Neville that root beer float so that we
Yeah,
can
root. Seat
take
bones
that.
down. Fear, let your belly go. Float, sternum forward up. Okay, we didn't talk about the number of joints you have in this upper body, but most people treat it as a single joint hinging from the bottom of the rib cage. There's a lot more joints in there than that. And just letting it expand forward up as opposed to taking the chest back.
And you can do that gently. And I know I'm looking for the comment here. Someone who I think is already a student of yours or a student in Effortless Rider course, Judy, mentioned this. That's a really good way to understand that feeling of bringing the sternum forward without then hollowing in the lower back, is to put one hand on your sternum, one hand on your lower back, and think about
Yeah.
widening between your two hands. And again, softly, so you're not putting so much tension in it that you get stiff in that position, but exploring with where can you move and um, how can you move there softly. It's one of the things too that uh, I love in the instruction that I've had from you, Wendy, and when I see you teach is you'll introduce a concept and then you'll always say, now do it with half the effort.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we try too hard. We want to get it right. And so we're going to like really make sure we get it right. And that's actually causes us a lot of trouble. I'm reading some of the comments in the chat here, and people are asking about legs. And the bottom line is if the pelvis isn't in the middle, right, with the seat bones straight down, you're going to have to brace on your stirrups. And so many people are taught heels down, forcing that down. I know that was something we were hoping to talk about today, but in the course, I talk a lot about heels down and what we're supposed to be doing versus what many people are doing and what they've been taught to do. Because the pelvis has to be in the middle and the torso has to be somewhat aligned so that the limbs can do their job of receiving the motion of the horse. And in all the other sports, like I always go back to the X Games, like, we recognize that the joints need to absorb, and somehow we think in riding, we're supposed to brace and stiffen everything. And so, but we can't find that relaxed place in the leg if the torso isn't balanced, because we've got the weight of our body coming down into our seat, and it's got to be in a way that allows the leg to then be able to follow the motion of the horse.
Yes. So if this was helpful, I would love to show some of what's included in the course. And Wendy, it's great to have you here because every time that we go through this, I think it's fun remembering all of the different ways that we taught this. And these pictures of the skeletons are directly from that course,
Yeah.
because the first modules are entirely focused around understanding the movement of the horse, the basic movement of the horse and the person from the skeletal perspective, what's going on inside the body. And then throughout all 5 of the modules, you did the equitip sections, which is
Yeah.
going kind of through the body into key joints, key areas that relate to movement for riders, key areas that relate to how they affect the horse, and basically looking at the comparative anatomy and talking about the function of those places in the body. So the Effortless Rider course has 5 different modules to it. Again, the first modules are really looking at the anatomy and understanding the body. Especially in this module is where Wendy went into all of those really common myths, those
Yeah.
misconceptions like heels down. Um,
Shoulders back.
yes, like bringing the shoulders back. And we showed all of these in motion with the skeletons together. This was just a screenshot that I took from one of the videos where I was creating a rising trot movement and you were manipulating the leg of Elmer here so that we could see, well, what actually happens in the hip joint when the heel is being pushed down, for example. And then in module 3 is the unmounted exercises. And this was an entire group of exercises to do at home with really simple things that you've already got: a stool, mirror, the big exercise balls, and then some other, fun things that you can easily get your hands on, some of the stretchy bands. But movements that you can do to understand the way that your body creates maps, creates proprioception, and how to start to change some of those things. So if you're like hitting up against a habit that you're finding is challenging to move past, these were really helpful.
Well, and so often we don't have enough time to ride, but we can do something unmounted that's going to help our riding. And that was a lot of what we were thinking about here is, quick things that you can do so that you're enhancing your riding even when you can't get to your horse, or say, while you're at work and you want to take a little break.
Yes. And then in module 4, it's completely focused on riding. And Wendy does a lot of demonstrations with Al. This is the same horse I was riding in the picture that you brought up.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of demonstrations with Al and starting to look at the simple riding movements. So doing transitions, doing rising trot, sitting trot, circles and turns, and showing in motion now with the horse, not just the skeleton. So it's like we, put on the layers of muscle as we move through the
Yeah.
program.
It's a great way to think of it.
And then in module 5 is looking at different riders. And you get to watch Wendy work with riders of different ages, different levels, very different body types, and seeing how, okay, what you've been practicing through the program works. And getting away from those kind of rote ideas, like one that's so often said is hands at the withers. Well, hands at the withers doesn't work so well if you've got a shorter arm. So we really see that as you worked with the different riders here. And then these were the equitips. It talks some about those. We did a fixes master class. So there's so many little things that Wendy, that you bring in, like working with the balls, there's the why can't I think of the correct name for them?
The Franklin balls.
Franklin balls. Thank you, Franklin. Working with the Franklin balls, working with the straps, working with the lookup glasses that you mentioned in the very beginning. These tools, I think sometimes people see them and they say, "Oh, that seems unnecessary," or "That seems like a lot to carry around." But when we bring in these curiosity provoking things and these things that can just change our experience right away, it can help us learn and feel something so much faster. And that's what we do in this session.
Yeah, sometimes you don't even realize how much of a habit something is until there's something that takes you out of that habit, and then your brain looks at it all brand new, and it's like, oh, why didn't you say that? Well, I actually have.
Yes. And then we also did a short session on saddle fitting, because we didn't even get into that in the scope of today's talk. But how your saddle fits your horse and how it fits you plays a huge role in how you feel, and if kind of how accessible certain positions or movements are. You don't want to be overriding your tack. So this module will help you identify, is my saddle serving me? What is the difference between a jump saddle, a dressage saddle, a western saddle? Where's the point of balance? Just getting the um the base level of knowledge to be able to know what's going on and make good choices about the tack that you want to ride in, so that you're not being held back by your saddle. And we brought this back in because we um we did a promo, and we included this Feldenkrais session for riders. And then we've gotten a lot of emails, which is part of why I asked Wendy to come back in and do another dedicated webinar for us. But we're also bringing back in the Feldenkrais for rider bonus a few days this week, so that you'll get this. This is a 30-minute class where Wendy guides through a session that you just do at home. Feldenkrais, if you've never done it before, is a very relaxing, gentle
Yeah,
movement session, but it really is
powerful in
very,
its small
very,
movement. Yeah.
yes, it's very powerful and very effective. And one of those things too, I find you go through it, and I always love this too after classes. No one has words for it after class.
Yeah, I know. That's the biggest because you're learning through movement the way a horse learns. And that's what we have to realize is we
Yeah.
learn through movement just like horses, and we don't have language in that movement part of our brain.
Yes, it's a felt experience, and not having language for it, I think, actually makes it more powerful. We've
Yeah.
seen when we started this session and everyone put in their phrases. So we have all this language to describe something, but it doesn't really help us do the movement, where the feeling is what we can take forward. So with the Effortless Rider course, you've got the 5 modules, you've got the weekly equitips. We've brought the Feldenkrais for Riders class back in. You also can take advantage of sending in 2 videos of your riding and get Wendy's feedback on your position, balance, what to focus on. We have the 5-minute Fixes Master class, and also the saddle fitting module. So we'd love to have you join us. I will put the link in here. I'm also going to get this recording ready for you as usual, as quickly as I can today, and send it out. And I will have your link in there too. So let me just come out of this. So thank you everyone for being here. And again, I know we've got had so many good questions come on, and I think this kind of work leads itself to those questions. So keep asking the questions, and come to your next riding session with kind of this feeling of experimentation in what you've heard today, and let us
Yeah,
know what feels different.
awesome. Well, thanks, Callie. I really appreciate having the chance to see you and chat with everybody about this. It's one of my favorite things to do, obviously.